The airport was crowded. He walked through customs in slippers, holding a plastic bag. No entourage, no suitcase, no luxury, just a broken man with tired eyes. 10 years ago, he left as a king. Now, he returned, as a deportee. But what happened to all his wealth? And why did no one come to welcome him home? Before we begin this story, where are you watching from? Comment below and enjoy. The first time Desmond boarded a plane out of Nigeria, he promised himself one thing. He would never return the same way he left. At just 23, he had nothing but a fake leather suitcase, 3 borrowed shirts, and an address written on the back of a church bulletin. His visa was a stroke of luck. His flight ticket had been funded by a group of friends who believed in him more than he believed in himself. He carried with him the hopes of his entire family and the weight of a village that expected him to become someone big. America at first was cruel. Cold nights on couches, long hours scrubbing toilets in restaurants. He was mocked for his accent and dismissed for his dreams. But Desmond was built for the climb. He took every job, legal or not, that paid, saved every cent, and kept his eyes on the horizon. By his 3rd year, he had a used Toyota, a basement apartment of his own, and a phone full of contacts. By year 5, he had a green card, 2 rental properties, and a reputation among Nigerian immigrants as someone who knew how to multiply money. Desmond was obsessed with success. He studied the rich, mimicked their routines, invested recklessly until he learned from the bruises. His first big break came from flipping homes in struggling neighborhoods. He bought cheap, fixed them fast, and sold high. Soon he was rubbing shoulders with brokers, signing deals at steakhouses, and walking into banks with confidence. The boy who once begged for shifts at gas stations now had an accountant, a lawyer, and a woman who introduced herself as his fiancée only after he bought her a BMW. He became what he once dreamed of. Rich. Not just by Nigerian standards, but even by American ones. Desmond wore tailored suits, threw parties in penthouse apartments, and flew first class on vacations to Mexico, Dubai, and Paris. His social media was a curated feed of Rolex watches, motivational quotes, and sunsets from infinity pools. People back home began calling him Boss Des. They praised him, envied him, worshipped him. But wealth came with a price. Desmond forgot who he used to be. Calls from his aging mother became chores. He sent money but never made time to visit. When she begged him to come home for Christmas, he sent photos of himself on a yacht instead. Friends from the old days were ghosted or blocked. They no longer fit into his new image. Even God became a background character in his story. Success was his religion now. He became entangled in faster circles, riskier deals, shadier investors. His desire to grow bigger led him to people who promised triple returns for half the work. Desmond didn't ask too many questions. He signed documents without reading them fully. He moved funds through shell accounts. He attended parties where deals were whispered in bathrooms over the sound of dance music and flowing champagne. At that level, the air felt invincible. Until it wasn't. It happened one morning, just after his 34th birthday. He woke to loud knocks on his condo door. Agents in dark suits, FBI printed on their jackets. They told him to get dressed, no explanations, just handcuffs. That was the moment Desmond's world cracked open. Over the following weeks, he was accused of money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. His name was printed in headlines, his face plastered on news outlets with captions that once praised, now mocking. Former friends distanced themselves. Clients pulled out. Investors demanded answers. His bank accounts were frozen. His lawyer tried to fight, tried to explain that Desmond was a pawn in a larger game. But Desmond couldn't deny that he had played along. He had taken shortcuts. He had looked the other way. The evidence was damning, and his silence couldn't save him. After 9 months of legal battles, he was sentenced to time served and marked for deportation. America had no more room for him. The man who once walked through airports like a king now boarded a plane with guards, wearing state-issued clothing and plastic slippers. He held a clear bag containing his remaining belongings: 1 watch, a wallet with no cash, a few photos, and the last bit of dignity he could carry. As the plane landed in Lagos, Desmond stared out the window. It was raining. Fitting, he thought. The country he left in sunshine would now receive him in a storm. He stepped off the plane, expecting at least one familiar face, a cousin, an old friend, a driver. But there was no one. Just taxi drivers shouting for passengers and a few airport staff exchanging glances at the tall, tired man who walked through the gates alone. Desmond had come home, but nothing felt like home anymore. The first thing Desmond noticed when he stepped onto the Lagos tarmac wasn't the humidity. It was the silence. Not around him, no. The city itself was alive, loud as ever. Horns blared from Okadas weaving through traffic. Hawkers yelled the names of their wares as they weaved between cars. Children ran barefoot across parking lots. But in Desmond's world, there was a silence that gnawed at him. A hollow space where someone should have been. He had pictured a cousin waving from a distance, or a childhood friend dashing forward with arms wide. But no one came. No welcome party. No camera phones to record his return. Not even his name whispered in passing. He walked past arrivals, clutching the see-through bag that screamed shame louder than his silence ever could. His expensive watch still lay in the bottom, its shine dulled under the plastic. People glanced at him the way you glance at someone who looks vaguely familiar but covered in disgrace. They didn't recognize him, or worse. They did, and looked away. Desmond stepped outside the terminal into the chaotic warmth of home. But it wasn't really home anymore. The streets had changed, buildings taller, the pace faster, and he looked like someone time had left behind. His once toned body had thinned. His eyes, once full of ambition, now carried the weight of too many nights in a detention center. He wore what he had been given, oversized sweatpants and a faded grey hoodie. The luxury suits and designer shoes were gone, left behind, just like everything else. He stood by the roadside, watching as cars zipped past. Eventually, a young man approached, offering him a ride for 5,000 naira. Desmond nodded, not because he could afford it, but because he didn't want to walk. As they drove through the city, he clutched the seatbelt with one hand and stared out the window with the other. The road took him past familiar landmarks, his old high school, a bakery he used to sneak into, and finally, the estate where his family once lived. That house. The one he had built with his first million. A grand structure, painted cream and gold, with tall gates and marble tiles. He had built it for his mother. Sent money for its upkeep, promised he'd return one day and stay in the guest wing with his American wife and future children. But when the taxi turned onto the street, Desmond's stomach dropped. The house looked different. Not freshly painted, but redone entirely. The walls bore new colours, grey and navy blue. A different name was engraved on the gate. 2 security dogs barked behind the fence. And parked in the driveway was a Lexus that Desmond had never seen before. He asked the driver to stop. He stepped out slowly, hands still shaking. He approached the gate and knocked. A boy, no older than 16, answered. Desmond asked for his mother. The boy blinked. "This isn't the Olivale house," he said. "They moved out years ago. Someone else owns this now." Desmond's knees weakened. The boy asked if he was all right. He nodded, backed away, and returned to the roadside. He sat on a broken pavement for nearly an hour. His family had moved. No one told him. Not a letter, not a message. His mother had changed her number after he stopped calling. His siblings had moved on, scattered across different cities, carrying whatever stories they had about their brother who once made it big and then disappeared into scandal. Shame had done what silence couldn't. It erased him from their world. With nowhere to go, Desmond contacted an old neighbour, a man named Femi who used to wash cars for him. He called from a borrowed phone and asked if he could stay for a few nights. Femi didn't ask questions, he simply said yes and sent an address. That night, Desmond slept on a foam mattress on the floor of a cramped apartment. He shared the space with 3 other men, mechanics who worked from dawn till dusk. None of them recognized him. That was a blessing. For now. Days passed, then weeks. Desmond tried to rebuild slowly, but he had no credentials, no certificates, no experience that fit into Nigeria's job market. He applied for office work, but was turned away for being overqualified, and in other cases for having no valid references. Word of his return spread quietly among distant relatives, but no one called, no one came. The boy, who had once been hailed as a community success story, was now treated like an embarrassment. He was the tale mothers whispered to their sons as a warning. Don't become like Desmond. So he did what he could. He began helping Femi at his roadside mechanic shop, wiping down engines, washing cars, pushing dead batteries up the slope. The same Desmond who once signed million-dollar contracts now held rags stained with grease and wore borrowed overalls. Every now and then, someone would stare at him too long, as if they saw something familiar beneath the grime, but they always turned away. No one ever said his name. The hardest part wasn't the labor. It was the silence, the absence of acknowledgement. To live in the very city where he was once known and have no one remember him was a punishment deeper than any prison. At night, he lay on the floor beside Femi and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes he replayed his past like an old movie. The money, the parties, the false friendships, the arrogance. And he would ask himself what had really brought him down. Was it greed? Was it pride? Or had he simply forgotten his purpose? The man nobody recognized had once been the man everyone envied. Now he was learning to live again. Not as Boss Des, not as the millionaire, but simply as Desmond. And for the first time in years, that felt honest. The village of Ogundele had changed in the years Desmond had been gone, but not enough to erase his name from memory. There were more buildings now, some freshly painted shops lining the once dusty roads, and a new borehole project at the centre of town. But the heart of the village remained the same. Gossip flowed faster than rainwater, and respect was still tied to status. Desmond had once left this village with a convoy. He remembered it clearly. A black SUV, the windows tinted, his sunglasses on despite the sun being blocked by thick Harmattan clouds. Children had run beside his car, shouting his name. Women had ululated and waved. He had thrown Naira notes out the window like rice at a wedding. That was how he said goodbye to the village that raised him. He had left as a king. But now, his return was the opposite of majestic. No tinted windows, no convoy. He arrived in a kike, dusty and cramped, wearing sandals and holding a small nylon bag that barely carried a change of clothes. The kike driver had to ask 3 times if he was sure about the location. Desmond simply nodded, too tired to explain the irony. When he stepped out into the village square, the eyes followed him instantly. A few people recognized him, his frame, his posture, the scar on his cheek that never quite faded. But the man they saw wasn't the Desmond they remembered. This one was smaller, leaner, humbler. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn out. There were whispers, then murmurs, and then the laughter began. It wasn't loud laughter. It was the kind that slid behind closed hands, whispered through cracked smiles, the kind that stung more than insults. They said things like, he thought he was better than us, and now look at him. Some shook their heads in mock pity, others stared openly, as if confirming a rumor that had just been proven true. Desmond didn't flinch, he expected it. But it didn't make the shame any easier to carry. He walked with his head high, but his heart pounded with every step. Every corner held a memory. That stall was where he bought his mother's favourite palm oil. That tree was where he first kissed Bisi, the girl who used to braid his sister's hair. That compound used to belong to his uncle, who died thinking Desmond would make the family proud. Now, all those places seemed to reject him. His return wasn't celebrated, it was mocked. He had come back hoping to find peace in simplicity. Instead, he found judgment dressed in familiar faces. An elderly woman who once danced at his farewell party now turned her face away when he passed. The local pastor, who once prayed for his success, offered only a weak smile and kept walking. Even children, too young to know his story, picked up on the whispers and pointed at him with the cruel innocence only kids possess. Desmond settled into a small room in his late uncle's abandoned house. The roof leaked, the walls cracked, the floor was bare cement, but it was shelter. Femi had helped him clean it up, and a local carpenter gave him an old mattress. Every night, Desmond lay there listening to crickets outside, the croaking of frogs after rain, and the occasional bark of dogs in the distance. But louder than all of that were the voices in his own head. He remembered how arrogant he had been, how distant he had become. His mother had written him letters he never opened. His younger brother had called him for school fees and was ignored. Even his pastor had sent voice notes encouraging him to stay grounded. He never replied. He had believed success meant never looking back. Now, all he had left was what he once turned his back on. But the village's laughter slowly began to lose its sting. After weeks of humiliation, Desmond decided to stop hiding. He started sweeping the front of his house every morning, no matter who watched. He greeted everyone politely, even those who mocked him. Some responded with awkward nods. Others ignored him completely. Still, he persisted. He began offering to help elders carry firewood from the bush. He offered to tutor school children in math under the tree beside the old community hall. At first, they were skeptical. But then the children began returning. They told their parents Desmond taught better than the teachers in the school. Soon their mothers came to watch. Then the fathers. Then the questions started to change. Was it true he once owned apartments in America? What really happened to him over there? Was it true he lost everything? How did he survive? Desmond answered honestly. For the first time in his life, he told the whole truth. Not the curated Instagram story, not the prideful version, just the raw, broken truth of ambition, greed, mistakes, and consequence. And slowly, the village stopped laughing. The day things changed completely was during the village council meeting. A dispute had broken out between two families over a piece of inherited land. The elders could not agree on how to settle it. Desmond stepped forward and offered a compromise, explaining land documentation and legal principles in a way none of them had heard before. He laid out a peaceful solution with fairness. The village chief nodded slowly, impressed. After that day, they stopped calling him the deportee. They started calling him Brother Desmond. He didn't have money, he didn't have status, but he had something else now. Earned not by wealth, but by humility. Desmond had lost everything he once thought defined him: money, reputation, luxury. But in that loss, something unexpected was found. Redemption did not come in applause or sudden favor. It came slowly, like smoke rising from ashes. One small act at a time, he began to rebuild. Not his wealth, but his dignity. The tutoring sessions under the tree became more than just lessons. Children who once pointed fingers at him now rushed to sit closest to him, eager to learn. Their parents, some of whom had once mocked his downfall, began bringing bottled water and roasted plantains to show appreciation. It was a small gesture, but Desmond felt it deeply. For the first time in years, he wasn't being rewarded for what he had. He was being valued for who he was. It started with the children, but it did not end there. Desmond began teaching young men how to fix electronics, an old skill he had picked up while working part-time in the States. He helped a woman named Mama Neka reorganize her small provision store to boost sales. He even helped the village youth group set up a fundraiser to purchase chairs for the community center. It wasn't money he offered, it was ideas, strategy, time. And in giving those things, he found a version of himself he had forgotten. One that wasn't driven by ego or status, but by service. But redemption was not without its challenges. There were still people who didn't trust him. Some whispered that it was only a matter of time before he tried to scam someone again. Others said he was playing humble just to regain sympathy. A few openly refused his help, and Desmond understood. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. But he didn't let their words stop him. The younger Desmond would have fought back with pride. This version moved in silence and let his actions speak. One evening, after helping a farmer record inventory using a hand-built spreadsheet, Desmond sat outside his small house and stared at the stars. The sky was so clear, not like the artificial glow of city lights, but a raw darkness filled with silent, flickering hope. He thought of his mother, long past. He had missed her burial, missed holding her hand in her final days. The guilt was heavy, pressing against his chest like a weight he could never set down. He whispered her name into the wind and hoped it reached wherever she rested. That night, he made a vow, not to reclaim his past, but to create something meaningful for the future. A few months later, an opportunity came. One of the elders, Baba Sei, approached him privately. He had inherited a large piece of land near the outskirts of the village, but had no idea how to develop it. He heard about Desmond's past dealings in real estate and wondered if he could help make something of it. Desmond was cautious. The last time he stepped into business, he had lost himself. But this was different. This wasn't about flipping homes or chasing status. This was about creating something lasting. They met every week to plan. Desmond drew layouts, created simple business models, and eventually they decided to build something the village lacked. A proper skill acquisition center, a place where young people could learn carpentry, tailoring, agriculture, plumbing, and digital literacy. Something real, something that would outlive them both. They started small. The community donated labor. Materials were purchased slowly, one truckload of cement at a time. And when money ran out, Desmond wrote proposals to NGOs and development partners. A few responded. A small grant came through, then another. The building began to rise, not fast, but steadily. As the walls went up, so did Desmond's hope. Children who once ran from him now greeted him with pride. Mothers smiled at him with gratitude. Young men shook his hand with respect. Even the old men at the palm wine joint began to nod at him when he passed by. It was in this phase that Desmond met Ifunanya. She was a quiet, determined woman who ran the only functioning library in the neighboring town. She had heard about his project and came to offer books for the center once it was completed. Their first conversation was awkward. Desmond was unsure how to speak to someone who didn't know who he used to be, and she wasn't interested in stories of fallen glory. She liked who he was now. They talked often. She taught him how to structure lesson plans. He helped her source better internet access for her library. They shared a love for impact, not attention. In Ifunanya, Desmond found what he had never known he needed: companionship, rooted in truth. The center was completed after 13 months. The opening day felt like a festival. Drummers came, women danced, children sang. The village chief gave a speech about transformation. Desmond stood quietly at the back, refusing to take the microphone when offered. It wasn't about him. Not anymore. He didn't wear a suit that day, just a plain white kaftan and slippers. The same man who once flew business class to Dubai now stood barefoot on village soil, watching lives begin to change because he had chosen to change. That night, he walked home slowly. The stars were bright again. He stood under the same tree where he used to tutor children, now replaced by the center's front door, and he smiled. Desmond hadn't reclaimed his former riches. But he had found something far greater: redemption through the ashes of who he used to be. One dusty morning, nearly 2 years after Desmond's return, he received a visit from a young man in a buttoned shirt and polished shoes who introduced himself as a surveyor. He was part of a team scouting for undeveloped land near the edge of Ogundil village for a proposed industrial estate. The government had released a map of targeted zones, and Desmond's name had come up on a long-forgotten parcel of land purchased years ago before his rise and fall. Desmond frowned. He didn't remember owning land in that area. The man showed him an official document. It bore his full name, registered under one of the companies he had created when he first started making money abroad. Desmond stared at the paper in disbelief. That small plot, just 5 acres in total, had once been worthless. He had bought it on a whim, intending to use it for farming. Then life had happened. He got caught up in luxury, then scandal, then deportation. The land had been left untouched, the documents buried in digital files he no longer had access to. The surveyor explained that development plans included roads, a small factory district, and possibly a tech hub. Landowners in the region were being approached for buyouts. The price? Enough to make Desmond sit down. The land he forgot he owned was now worth millions. He didn't react immediately. Old Desmond would have jumped at the offer, taken the money, and disappeared, but this version had learned to breathe before chasing. He asked for time to think. For days he walked the property. It was overgrown, quiet and peaceful. He remembered the man who bought it, young, driven, full of hope. That Desmond had dreamed of building something for his village even back then, but greed and ego had changed the course. Now it was like fate had brought him back to that forgotten vision. The offers kept coming. Private developers wanted to turn the land into warehouses. One investor offered double if Desmond agreed to vacate immediately. Everyone saw potential. But Desmond saw responsibility. He reached out to Ifunanya and Babasei. They sat under the mango tree near the training center and discussed the future. What if they didn't just sell it? What if they used it to expand, a proper vocational school, a women's cooperative farm, a startup incubator for rural youth? They could sell a portion, keep the rest, and create a model that would give people a chance. Not just for survival, but for elevation. It wasn't an easy decision. Desmond still had needs. He lived simply, but he lacked comfort. A part of him wanted to take the money and build a nice house, maybe travel again. But he had tasted that life already. It had left him empty. This new life, of purpose, of impact, filled him in ways riches never could. He sold only 1 acre. The payout was enough to settle personal debts, replace his clothes with dignity, and furnish a modest home. The remaining land was reserved for community projects, beginning with a learning centre and agricultural programme. Government representatives came to partner, NGOs signed on, and the same villagers who once laughed at him now brought their children to enrol in his programmes. The story of the deportee who returned in disgrace but rose from the dust became one of inspiration. People from neighbouring towns came to see the centre. Young men asked him to speak at their gatherings. Women sought advice on small businesses. Students wrote essays about him, calling him a role model. One evening, a local radio host asked Desmond to share his story. He didn't glamorize his rise or sugarcoat his fall. He told the truth. The greed, the arrogance, the betrayal, and the painful return. He told them how he had to relearn humility and rebuild his life with bare hands. He ended with a simple message. Sometimes, the best version of yourself is born from your worst mistake. His words spread across local networks. Videos of his story circulated on social media. Not the luxury photos from his past, but the images of him planting trees, teaching under a tin roof, and sitting with elders in his village. Those were the moments that truly defined him. Years passed. The centre expanded. The community grew stronger. Desmond never moved out of the village. He could afford to, but he chose to stay. He married Ifunyanya in a quiet ceremony under the mango tree, surrounded by students and friends. They had a daughter who bore his mother's name. And every year, on the anniversary of his return, he walked the path he first took from the airport with the same clear plastic bag in hand. Not as a reminder of shame, but as a symbol of transformation. He never tried to erase his past. Instead, he used it to shape the future. Desmond, once the forgotten deportee, had become a pillar of hope. He didn't reclaim the wealth he once flaunted, but he gained something far greater: purpose, peace, and a legacy that would outlive him. Would you welcome someone like him back? Comment below. What would you do if your past came back to humble you? If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit the like button, Comment your favorite part and subscribe for more amazing stories. Your support helps us keep bringing you new adventures every week. Thanks for watching.